town of Fort Bragg, and also be seen all over the world because we are streaming live on the internet right now. And that's really exciting. First time ever we've done that. Now I have the honor of presenting Dr. Thomas Lodi. Thomas Lodi, MD, a master-level psychologist, received his medical degree in 1985 from the University of Hawaii. He completed his internship and residency in internal medicine at Columbia University and worked for 10 years as an internist, urgent care physician, and intensivist. That's kind of hard for me to say. ICU and CCU. After several years of additional training in alternative modalities, he narrowed his focus to integrative oncology. He is a member of ASCO, a diplomat of the American Board of Anti-Aging Medicine, an instructor and practitioner in insulin potentiation therapy, and he is certified in oxidative and chelation therapies. Dr. Lodi is a licensed medical doctor in the state of New York and homeopathic medical doctor in the state of Arizona. At his practice, an oasis of healing in Mesa, Arizona, the foundation of the therapies is restoring the integrity of the immune system and organ function through detoxification and proper nutrition. Wow. This is an expert. This man knows what he's talking about and has a lot to share. Please help me welcome Dr. Thomas Lodi.
Thank you. How many people were here or heard the talk on Friday? Okay, about half. All right, because there were some important concepts that I'll try to review. But today I was going to talk about disease. Oh, another question: how many people either have cancer, had cancer, or know people with cancer? 1 out of 2 men will get cancer in their lifetime, and 1 out of 2.8 women will get cancer in their lifetime in this country and Europe, Asia. The World Health Organization recently announced, you might have recalled, that by 2010 the leading cause of death worldwide will be cancer. So this is the real pandemic. The other one we're hearing about is really a plandemic. That's the influenza, where the swine and the chickens mated. You understand how that works, right? You believe that, right? Okay, so I want to talk about disease. And what do we have to talk about if we're going to talk about disease? First thing we need to talk about is health. What is health? And if you ask most practitioners and most people, they'll define health as the absence of disease. And that's like saying that light is the absence of darkness. How much darkness do you take out of a room to find the light? It's an absurd concept. Okay, so the truth is that disease, health is not the absence of anything, it's the presence of something. And it's the presence of the ability to regenerate, rejuvenate, and procreate. Okay, and to do that exuberantly. And this happens because the imperative of nature is to regenerate, rejuvenate, and procreate. It's a very important concept to understand. If you were to slice your arm by mistake, cutting a coconut open, it would heal. That's what nature does. Nature heals and it overcomes. Water rolling down a hill, if you put a rock there, it's going to go around it. You've got to put a pretty big dam up to stop it. Okay, so nature is irresistibly drawn to heal, to grow, to procreate. Okay, that's the natural state of things. Okay, what is nature? Nature is a perfect, I don't know what to call it, but it's perfect. If a bear has a bowel movement, it turns out to be nourishment for other organisms. There's no waste in nature. And nature can be seen as having billions and billions of faces, of eyes. It's got the eyes of a butterfly, and it's got the eyes of a bear, the eyes of a human. That's what nature is. And every set of eyes, every aspect of nature, must function optimally in order for this whole to be perfect. And it is perfect. And so this optimal functioning of every aspect of nature is what we would call health. So the optimal functioning of an organism is its health. And that's what health is. Okay. Optimal functioning is allowed and is permitted through a mechanism known as instinct. Instinct is how we are plugged into the wisdom of nature. Unfortunately, humans are disallowed instinct. Our parents tell us early on that it's not acceptable to be instinctual. Don't put that in your mouth. Don't touch that. Don't. And pretty soon we find ourselves completely cut off from nature, living in boxes and driving around in machines, living artificial lives. Now, when we talk about optimal functioning of an organism, it can only be understood in the context of its environment. If you were to describe the life cycle of a bird, you would have to include worms. And the life cycle of a worm, you'd have to include birds. How would you describe walking if you don't describe the street upon which you're walking or the path upon which you're walking? If you don't have that, you'd have just two legs dangling. Okay, so we have to understand, unfortunately, our Western education and our Western ignorance has taught us to distinguish things and to not see the whole, not see the yin-yang there. Okay, so we see the bird flying, and we think the bird's flying. You know, as the bird decided to get up and fly. Right? And all the birds in the flock decide immediately to turn right, and they quick communication. Okay, none of that's happening. What's really happening is life happens. Birds fly, not because they decided to, because it's their destiny to fly. This environment that we're talking about is the niche. In biology, it's called a niche. Niche, niche. And each organism is part of that niche. So the worm is part of the bird's niche, and the bird is part of the worm's niche. Okay? And when removed from that niche, there can no longer be optimal functioning. And that's... So consider this. Consider a sea bass taken out of the saltwater sea and put into a freshwater lake. There's going to be a problem. You take an eagle off the cliffs and you put it into a cave with bats. It's going to be a problem. Okay. What does our niche and what does our optimal functioning look like? Well, our niche is our niche is between the tropics of Capricorn and Cancer. We're from the subtropics. That's where we function. That's our niche. Okay, where there is abundant vegetation and water and warm sunshine. And survival is not an 8-hour-a-day requirement. Survival is something that takes 1 to 2 hours. And there's a lot of leisure and love, swimming, laughing, music. That's our niche. As we left that niche and we moved north and south of those lines, we got into environments which were not appropriate for us, and so we adapted. And so now we'll find Eskimos drinking blubber. And we'll find cultures where they're eating live monkey brain. Okay. This enculturation process, which has caused us to ignore our instincts. If you think about any culture, whether it's Chinese or Italian or German, what is the centerpiece of every culture? What holds it together? What is the altar of that culture that everyone gathers around daily? The cuisine, the dinner table. Okay. Right? Would you go to Italy and not eat pizza or pasta? You know. If you did, you'd probably be suffering the whole time that you didn't eat it. Okay. There we go. Optimal functioning of a human being. We have no clue. We know what it is for butterflies and bears and birds. We have no clue for humans. We do know that Einstein used about 9% of his potential. We know that there are people in Machu Picchu who are fathering children anywhere from the ages of 90 and up. We know that Victoris, if everyone's read his book, you recall in one of the chapters about that man from China who was congratulated on his 150th birthday by the Chinese government, and then on his 200th birthday, and then he was thought to have died around the age of 256, around there. And this was in the 1930s, before we had too much propaganda going on. Anyway, the point is we have no idea what our potential is. And if you look at the patriarchs in the Old Testament, average of 912 years before the flood. Okay, so the point is we don't know what our potential is, but it's certainly not shriveling up at the age of 90 and falling over. We were probably designed to live about a millennium. Okay. Now, we said that health is not the absence of disease, it's the opposite. Disease is the absence of health, just as darkness is the absence of light. What causes the darkness? The shadows. There are shadows. All right? Absence of light. Shadows block them. So you can have a very sunny day and the clouds are there, you start to get shadows. It gets darker and darker. Okay? So, these shadows are cast by obstructions. And keep in mind, it's very important, shadows are not real. Just ask Peter Pan. He had it sewn onto his foot, if you all recall. Anyway, what are these shadows when it comes to health or lack of it? These are cultural behaviors that we learn. So we learn to do certain things, and those become the obstructions to health and the cast shadows, which we call disease. I'm going to review disease. I'm going to right now quote an MD, another MD, who I have a lot of respect for. Under most circumstances, I have very little respect for MDs. Not because, all the good stuff we can say about them, but a bit because of what they do and what they don't do. Most MDs ignore the truth to the detriment of their patients. And I remember taking a Hippocratic oath, and I can't imagine not living up to that oath. And that, first of all, do no harm. 85% of oncologists, when surveyed anonymously, would not do their own treatments, and they bring their wives to people like me and their husbands. Okay, so we're beyond negligence. We're into evil. Okay, so anyway, but John Tilden, 1840. In the 1840s he was born. He died in 1850s. He was born and died in 1940. Okay, he wrote a book called Toxemia Explained. Everyone should read it if you haven't. Incredible book. But here's a quote by him. "There is no hope that medical science will ever be a science, for the whole structure is built around the idea that there is an object, disease, that can be cured when the right drug, remedy, cure is found." And I'd like to read you part of his preface, and it's very important, so please listen. Part of his preface to the book Toxemia Explained. From time immemorial, man has looked for a savior. And when not looking for a savior, he is looking for a cure. He believes in paternalism. He is looking to get something for nothing, not knowing that the highest price we ever pay for anything is to have it given to us. Instead of accepting salvation, it is better to deserve it. And instead of buying, begging, or stealing a cure, it is better to stop building disease. Diseases of man's own building, and one worse thing than the stupidity of buying a cure, is to remain so ignorant as to believe in cures. The false theories of salvation and cures have built man into a mental mendicant when he could be the arbiter of his own salvation and certainly his own doctor. Instead of being a slave to a profession that has neither worked out its own salvation from disease nor discovered a single cure in all the age-long period of man's existence on earth. So, now we're going to get into some of the details of what disease is. As our body metabolizes, metabolism means it's made of two parts: anabolism and catabolism. So building up and tearing down. Okay, and that's the ebb and the flow. If you look out the ocean there, it ebbs and flows, and all life is ebbing and flowing. Okay, so cells are built and they're torn down, and it's all done perfectly. The parts that are torn down and recycled, which are called can be called metabolic wastes. Okay, those are normally taken care of by physiological processes such as urinating, defecating, sweating, and even vomiting. Okay. This is a physiological mechanism of excreting these metabolic wastes and also some other wastes. In addition to metabolic wastes, there are environmental toxins. I don't have to get into that here, but you all know that we live in a sea of toxins, right? From the carpeting to exhaust and everything in between. Now we have electromagnetic poisons. So, what is poison? Well, what is food? Food is something that can be assimilated by the body, by whatever species, whatever organism has ingested it. It's something that can be used for nourishment. It can be used to build new tissue. Poison is that which cannot be used and must be expelled on a very subtle level. And these poisons are can be mild to severe, as you well know. Okay, so the accumulation of one other thing with food, consuming something that you can use, would we consider oxygen a food? Would we consider water a food? Plants. Yeah. Okay. Now, one quick idea I want to just put in here because it's appropriate, and that is everything that we need in the amount that we need, and we don't need any more. Okay, we need oxygen anywhere from 20 to 30% of the atmosphere. Okay, if you put a 100% oxygen mask on your mouth and your nose, within 2 weeks you would have emphysema. You know, water is very important. You drink 5-6 gallons a day and you won't live very long. Okay, just keep that in mind. Of course, food is the same, or it's things that we ingest, and chew, and swallow. Okay, so the accumulation of toxins, whether they're from the environment or metabolic waste products, they start to accumulate and then they spill into the blood. The suffix of the word that is used to describe anything in the blood is emia. So if you have very low blood, it's anemia. Okay? If you have too much blood, it's hyperemia. Well, if you get toxins in the blood, it's called toxemia. And that's where the word comes from. Toxemia, spillage of toxins into the blood. And so what we call disease is our body's effort to get rid of this. Okay, and so now those efforts, depending on how much toxins are being brought in and accumulating and all that, and what organ is working the hardest, and which organ starts to malfunction, we'll call it a disease. It's as if if you look at it as a trunk, the trunk of a tree is the toxemia, and all the branches are the manifestations, and that goes from headache to cancer. Okay. Now, Tilden also, in his back in the early 20th century and the late 19th century, talked about symptoms. Symptoms are usually called diagnoses. My diagnosis is you have a headache. All right. Well, doesn't mean anything. Let's figure out what are we talking about with headache? Is it due to pressure? Is it due to arterial spasm, as in migraines and dilatation? What's it due to? So let's say we find out it's due to pressure. Is pressure the disease? Well, what's causing the pressure? And if you keep going, now let's say eventually it hemorrhages. Is hemorrhage the disease? Well, let's say you die. Is death the disease? You understand that the more you keep trying to figure out what it is behind it, you'll get down to only one thing. It's called toxemia. As John Tilden says, when the cause of the pain is found, it too will be found to be a symptom and not a disease. And this will be true to the end. Okay. All the medical literature, from the Journal of the American Medical Association, the New England Journal of Medicine, the British Journal of Medicine, the Lancet, all these prestigious journals are all based on discussing that which is a fantasy, because there's no disease and there's no cure, therefore no cure. You understand that medicine is based on the fact that every disease is separate, distinct, and therefore has a separate and distinct etiology or cause. And by having a separate and distinct etiology and cause, it therefore requires a separate and distinct cure. And you got to come to me because I studied all these things and I know these things. None of it is true. Now, there's another group. I want to try to give you a little tour here of some of the thinking. Homeopathy. There was a guy, one of the homeopaths, came up with the concept of homotoxicology. It's very similar, and I just want to briefly do it. So, again, he says diseases are caused by toxins, and homotoxin, homo means toxins produced within. Chemicals, microorganisms, byproducts, post-traumatic cellular debris, and byproducts of hidden metabolic processes. What is the organism? And this is a really good concept. What is the organism? The organism is a flowing system of energy. Circulating. This energy circulates throughout the matrix. The matrix is the intercellular space. Every cell is surrounded by a space. Blood vessels don't go directly into a cell. They go into an area that's called the extracellular space. Okay, the blood vessel goes in there, the vein drains it out, the nerves go in there, the autonomic nervous system, and it's this matrix, this extracellular space that has to have a pH of 7.4. It's this matrix that has to have a certain oxygen concentration, has to have a certain glucose level. So it's really this matrix that is the bath around which cells have their existence. Okay? This matrix is what is the meridians in Chinese medicine. Okay. What homotoxins are, according to this view of it, is that homotoxins are, they reduce the conductivity. Now remember, we talked about, the other day we were talking about electrolytes and sodium and potassium and all these things, which are positively charged elements that allow the conduction of electrons, and that is what we call electricity. And we're reminded that we determine if our heart's working by doing an EKG, and we look at the electrical output of our heart, and the shape of those waveforms tells us a lot. Okay? Flat lines are usually to be avoided, and the same thing with Same thing with brain waves, EEGs, EMGs. Okay, so the detection of whether or not life is present is done by measuring electrical output. Okay, and also the evaluation of the quality of that life form. Okay, so anyway, so the homotoxicologist had it pretty good there. Okay. I won't, because I'm running out of time, I won't go into all this. It's very important. But at the center of the matrix is a little cell called the fibroblast. And the fibroblasts, I mentioned the other day, too, that we no longer consider the nucleus of the cell, where the DNA is, as being the brains of the cell. Rather, it's the sex organ of the cell. The brains are the membranes. Easy to remember. Membranes are in touch with the environment, the matrix. Okay? So, in the matrix is a little cell called the fibroblast. And what it does is it is sampling what's going on and producing the appropriate glycosaminoglycans and proteoglycans and all these special types of cells or cellular products that maintain the conductivity because they're all negatively charged. Okay, so fibroblasts are pretty important little things. As an example of what these proteoglycans are is like, for example, heparin, which lines blood vessels. Every time you get a cut, you get stabbed with a toothpick, and you get a cut. Not only are you starting to clot, but you've got all this heparin being produced to not clot. Okay, so in our body, it's always working to balance. If you get too many clots, you get a stroke, you get a kidney infarct. So. Okay, so according to homotoxicology, the type and severity of an illness is determined by the duration and intensity of the toxin. And it's the ultimate clogging of this matrix, the blocking of this matrix that results in cellular damage, organ damage, and disease. Okay, so I really like their view of things. And they actually have broken it down to 6 phases of disease. The excretion phase, the inflammation phase, digestion phase, impregnation phase, degeneration phase, and the differentiation phase, the 6th phase of disease. I won't go into all of them because it would be another whole lecture, but the differentiation phase is important because this is where malignant disease arises. Malignant disease is just the end of a sequence. I can't tell you how many patients have sat in front of me and said, I'm really healthy except for the cancer. And it's true. They believe it, they mean it, and it's true. Why? Because we don't know what health is. If you want to get an idea of health, go to a nursery school. Bouncing off the walls, doing somersaults, that's health. That's health. What's the difference between an old man and a young man, besides the shape of the body and all that? Energy. Let's look at the energy. Okay? Remember, energy. He was talking about energy in the matrix. Energy. Why do we eat? We eat to get energy. That energy comes from the sun, through the plants, to the animals. How much energy can you get from eating a corpse? If you're a maggot, you'll probably do pretty well. It's unbelievable. But there are still people, I'm sure, in this audience, too, that dine on corpses. It's amazing. If we make it past 212, I'm sure there will be a time in the future where people will look back and say, can you imagine they used to eat corpses? It's like, if you look up the word ghoul, Ghoul, that's what a ghoul does. They devour corpses. But it tastes good. I feel better. I feel better when I shoot a spoon of heroin. I feel better when I smoke a fat cigar. If it feels good, do it, right? Okay. What? 10 minutes. Wow. There's no way. The earliest, okay, inflammation is also what we refer to as the fundamental pathology in disease. Inflammation basically goes way back to the Romans. And actually the Egyptians are the first ones to describe it, and then the Romans did. And the Romans gave us pretty much the cardinal signs of inflammation: calor, dolor, tumor, and rubor. Calor is heat, dolor is pain, rubor is redness, and tumor is getting bigger. Okay? So tumor is just something that's larger. Okay? It can be benign, like that, like a blister, or malignant. Okay, so, but anyway, it all has to do with increasing the blood flow, making the blood vessels more permeable so that the tissues get bathed with, the immune system shows up. Okay, the immune system is white blood cells, macrophages, and a whole variety of cells. And they start producing what are called cytokines and interleukins, leukotrienes. And what these chemicals do is they are communicating to the rest of the body what's going on here, all that. And they do that by going into the lymphatics. They send it to the blood, and then they go into the lymphatics, and they get up to a lymph node, and that's where they really, do a lot of work. And so run when the surgeon tells you he wants to remove your lymph nodes, because we found a lump in your lymph node. Okay? That lump means your lymph nodes are doing what they were designed to do. Okay? Should we do lymphatic massage on someone with breast cancer? Yeah. No. Make it stagnant. Don't let it move. What happens if it's stagnant? What happens if water gets stagnant? Are you going to drink out of it? No. Okay. Anyway, our modern understanding of inflammation is much, much more complex. And it's, you got to have a PhD in biochemistry to understand it. So the word we put on, the suffix that we put on the end of words is called itis, I-T-I-S. Bronchitis, iritis, rhinitis, dermatitis. What does it mean? It means inflammation. So inflammation is the body's first attempt to, if you can't excrete it from your urine, if you can't defecate it, can't sweat it out, your body will next do inflammation. And what they're finding out now is that inflammation, which occurs and then is resolves, occurs and resolves, right? Acute inflammation, you get hit there and it goes away. Okay. Again, the ebb and flow, the rhythm of nature, the rhythm of life. Okay. When something happens and that inflammation becomes chronic, it's that chronic inflammation that underlies the development of pathological physiology, pathological biochemistry. Okay. There's so much to talk about. When we talk about lipids are fats. Our bodies produce arachidonic acid and eicosanoids, which are the omega-6 and omega-3s. Okay, they're both necessary. We need that little bit of arachidonic acid to do the pro-inflammatory job, and we need the eicosanoids to do the anti-inflammatory job. Okay, that's the yin-yang, like estrogen and progesterone, right? A lot of women are walking around with lumps in their breasts, not because of anything other than there is not a balance of estrogen and progesterone. Yin-yang. Okay. So, arachidonic acid, too much arachidonic acid gets sequestered because it is an absolute poison. It causes total body inflammation. And it's found in animals. Animals have arachidonic acid. Okay. So every time you eat a corpse, and when they die, there's a lot of inflammation going on too. Every time you eat a corpse, you're eating a lot of arachidonic acid. Anyway, one of the ways in which we measure inflammation, how do we measure inflammation? Because was it 2002, I think Life magazine or Time magazine had on their cover, we found the test. There's one test that is more important than your cholesterol. It's called CRP, C-reactive protein. Okay, C-reactive protein was discovered back in the 30s, and basically it's produced by the liver. The liver produces a CRP, and it's not just a measure. It's not just there for us to measure. I mean, nature didn't produce CRP for us to measure and define and to be able to evaluate inflammation, but it actually has a purpose. It does certain things. It actually allows the phagocytosis by immune cells of other cells. Phagocytosis. Phago means eat, right? Cyto means cell. Okay. So what does, what's that word again? Necrophagia mean? Eating of dead tissues. Cheeseburger. Steak, pork chops. Sushi. Give me some dead tissue. Okay. Anyway, CRP is part of the acute phase reactants that are produced by the liver. They have a purpose. So we now know that if it rises the fastest within the first 6 hours, so we can look at CRP levels. Because they found out, the cardiologists, do you remember all the stuff about Lipitor and cardiac disease? And we've got to lower the cholesterol, right? My cholesterol's... Right? Well, it turns out that half the people having heart attacks have normal cholesterols. So what does it mean? Nothing. Cholesterol. What they were finding is that their CRP was up. Okay, C-reactive protein. And it was more predictive. They did a study with 28,000 women looking at their CRP levels and found them to be more predictive of anything. Post-surgically, in all different areas. Okay? So looking at the inflammatory state of the body is more important. There's another way, Dr. Barry Sears, the zone diet. Again, another, when someone's giving you a lecture or discussion, look at them. Look at their body. Look at Andrew Weil's body, and then tell me what you're going to believe about nutrition. I mean, he might know a lot. He's from Harvard, like, whoa. So he might know a lot of stuff, but he certainly doesn't know how to eat, and if he does, he doesn't practice it. So you have to really just look at the person that's talking to you. But anyway, Barry Sears, brilliant guy, found out, has brought to everyone the concept of silent inflammation as being the cause of all disease. This is great, because now what's happened is modern science is coming back to what the ancients have always known. It's beautiful. It's kind of like Fritjof Capra wrote a book called The Tao of Physics. Right? He found out that physicists now know what the ancients knew. It's fantastic. We have to come back to it. As Solomon said, there's nothing new under the sun. It's just not. That's absolutely true. Anyway, so CRP. So what Barry Sears found out is that you look at the arachidonic acid to the EPA ratio. Okay? Eicosapentaenoic acid, EPA, and arachidonic acid. Arachidonic acid is going to cause pro-inflammation, and this is going to cause anti-inflammation. And it's that ratio. If that ratio is around 1, you're in absolute perfect health. 1.5, that's great. Up to 3, you're okay. And then, so we look at most Americans, they're 12. Okay. Anyway, we found out that it's related to every disease. Okay. So what should we do? Let's reduce inflammation. Now, and what's the ultimate inflammatory disease? Aging. Okay. What I want to get to here is, finally, there is a guy named, real quickly on fat, obesity, okay? They did an amazing, I don't know how these people sleep at night, but they did an amazing study where they took obese men, went in and did surgery on them, and removed the visceral fat, the fat around the organs, not around the belly. And they're all diabetic, because when you get to that weight, you're diabetic. Diabetic is an eating disorder, remember that, diabetes, type 2. Anyway, that visceral fat is what is causing the diabetes. Their diabetes went away by getting rid of that. Okay. Now, the visceral fat, remember, what does it do? Fat has its adipocytes and it's got macrophages. Macrophages, white blood cells in there. Both of them produce IL-6, interleukin-6. And if you know anything about the anatomy there, you'll remember that all the organs drain through the portal vein into the liver. So you've got these high levels of IL-6 going to the liver. Liver's pumping out C-reactive protein. So it's the visceral fat. So the first thing you want to do to get healthy is fast, cleanse. Wow. What a concept. There are botanical things that we can use, but again, going to botanical medicine, again, that's why most naturopaths are not natural. They're allopaths in green coat instead of a white coat. Hey, I got this bag of Boswellia for you, or, quercetin. The truth is, nature fixes itself. That's what it does. Remove the impediments and it will heal. It has to heal. It has no choice. Okay, ginger, turmeric, all these things. You can use those and then go eat a cheeseburger. Oh, wow.
Excuse me, in your lecture, I'm just not following how disease, I understand the physical part, but where's the correlation with the mind?
I'm coming to it now. I only got 2 minutes. Okay. What's the correlation of disease to the mind? Okay, this was way too long of a lecture. I can't do it. So what I'll do is I'll go to that. Basically, okay. Anyway, as a real quick aside, Luigi Fontana did some work at Washington University where he looked at raw foodists and he looked at regular eaters. And when he looked at all the different parameters that he looked at, he found out that their bones were thinner. However, they did not have osteoporosis, and they were strong. He also looked at the fact that all of them had lower CRP levels. Imagine that, eating raw food. This correlates with what we found out in the 30s when they did a blood test on people and found out the white blood cells were elevated with cooked food and were normal. Okay, I know. So anyway, that's Luigi Fontana. He's done some great work, and he's found the same thing happens in caloric restriction and eating raw foods. But what I want to here, it's something that I've termed. It's called psychological inflammation. Okay, psychological inflammation is what we call stress. All right. Now, what is stress? Stress really impacts all diseases. Stress is really. It was, Hans Selye was the guy that defined it initially, because stress used to be a physical thing, right? You stress on a muscle, stress on a... Okay. Stress is when you don't like what is. That's all it is. Your prediction of how it should be is not happening. Okay? Now, so that opposing of how it should be and how it is are opposing, and we call that stress. Okay, and the inflammation of the mind. Okay. Okay. Now, so what is the? I won't go into details. I just wanted to at least answer your question. But that's how it is. How do we de-stress? Well, how do you get healthy? What did we just mention a moment ago? You get healthy by fasting. Stop eating. Stop eating. Drink a lot. Rest. Clean your colon out, and you will heal. So how do we really make the mind better? See, in the West, if you go to Western psychologists, which I had training in, it's just as insane as the medical world. We're going to make we're going to make your mind more healthy. In the East, what I love about the East is they say the mind is the problem. Transcend the mind, and you're okay. Not going to make a better working mind, because the mind is an artificial place. It's made of symbols, and it's made of pictures and words, neither of which are real. The word chair and the picture of a chair is not a chair, right? And that's what the mind does. And the mind also deals in this artificial thing called time. I've never, ever been anywhere where it wasn't now. Ever. So that's why I don't carry watches. They're irrelevant. They're made up. Anyway, the point is the mind works in time, which isn't. And it works, and it also, because we always think about what was, what could be, what should be, what might be, what could have been, what should have been, and what will be. None of it is. And what happens when we're there? We're unhappy. You're never happy when you're thinking about that stuff. When are you happy? You're happy when your mind is turned off. What are moments that allow us to turn our mind off? Orgasm comes to mind. You're not thinking at that moment. Music. Why do we love music? Music is now. Dancing, surfing. Okay. The minute we talk, the minute we think, we're disturbed. So this whole thing comes down to two: fasting and meditating. Meditation is not some religious thing. It's just a matter of turning off the mind and getting a method to do that. Okay, when you turn off the mind, you're just aware. And that awareness, what are you aware of? Bliss, perfection. That's all that's going on. Okay, because remember, nature is perfect, and the creatures are connected to that nature. You know, do you think? Just remember, dogs are not sitting around anticipating, right? Or having remorse for what they barked about, you know. And neither is a flock of birds when they're going, okay, we're coming up, turn right. Okay, so life is a happening. Okay, so the best thing to do about anything is nothing. Anyway, thank you. I'll close with that.